in the affluent neighborhood of Oak Ridge, where manicured lawns and stately homes lined quiet streets. 28-year-old Alex Foster found himself caught in a nightmare that would forever change his perception of safety. It was a crisp autumn evening when Alex decided to visit his girlfriend, Samantha, who lived just 2 blocks away. The streetlights cast long shadows as he began his short journey, the familiar path now seeming eerily different in the growing darkness. As Alex walked, an unsettling feeling crept over him. The first disturbance was subtle, a rustle in the nearby hedges. Dismissing it as the wind, he quickened his pace. But the sounds persisted. A twig snapped underfoot, seemingly amplified in the quiet night air. Alex paused, scanning the street. Nothing but shadows and stillness greeted him. The row of meticulously trimmed bushes lining the sidewalk suddenly seemed more ominous than decorative, potentially concealing unseen threats. With Samantha's house now in sight, Alex's relief was short-lived. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed behind him, quick, light, and alarmingly close. His heart racing, Alex called Samantha, his voice betraying his growing panic. As he rounded the corner onto Samantha's property, he saw her silhouette in the upstairs window, a beacon of safety. Their eyes met, and she waved, still on the phone. But her expression suddenly changed to one of horror. "Alex," Samantha's voice trembled through the phone. "There's someone right behind you." Time seemed to stand still as Alex turned. There, crouched, not 10 feet away, was a man, his features hidden in shadow, but his intent clear. Alex's scream pierced the night as he bolted for Samantha's front door, pounding desperately. The stranger lunged, his arms encircling Alex in a vice-like grip. For a terrifying moment, Alex felt his feet leave the ground. Then, as suddenly as it began, the attacker released him and fled into the darkness. Samantha's mother flung open the door, her face a mask of concern. As Alex stumbled inside, the reality of his narrow escape hit him full force. His legs gave way as Samantha rushed to his side, her mother already dialing the police. That night, as Alex tried to sleep in Samantha's guest room, every creak and groan of the house startled him awake. The shadows outside the window seemed to move, and he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the light of day, the police found no trace of the mysterious assailant. But for Alex, the damage was done. The safe, peaceful neighborhood he once knew now held a sinister undercurrent. Every bush could hide a threat, every shadow conceal danger. As he was driven home the next morning, Alex realized that his sense of security had been shattered. The familiar streets of Oak Ridge would never look the same again, forever tainted by the memory of that terrifying night when the darkness almost claimed him. On a tempestuous autumn night, in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, the Harrison family found themselves unwittingly thrust into a nightmare. The wind howled like a banshee, rain lashing against windows with relentless fury. Inside their cozy 2-story home, each family member was absorbed in their own world. Thomas, the 30-year-old son, lounged in his ground-floor bedroom, the flickering light of the television casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the living room, Robert and Linda Harrison chuckled at a sitcom, blissfully unaware of the terror about to unfold. Upstairs, their daughter Emma was lost in the digital realm of her video games. Thomas had always found solace in stormy nights, the pitter-patter of rain, usually a soothing lullaby. But tonight was different. A thunderous bang on his window shattered the peaceful ambience, causing Thomas to leap from his bed in alarm. Peering through the rain-streaked glass, Thomas discerned a figure outside, its features distorted by the downpour. The stranger began pounding frantically on the window, desperate cries for help, barely audible over the storm's rage. Cautiously, Thomas cracked open the window. "Help me. I'm hurt," the stranger wailed. The rain's deafening roar forced Thomas to shout back, directing the man to the front door before slamming the window shut. Thomas rushed to the living room, breathlessly informing his father about the distressed man outside. As if on cue, frantic knocking and pleas for help erupted from the front door. Robert moved to answer, but Thomas held him back, an inexplicable unease gripping him. At that moment, the phone rang, the caller ID displaying their neighbor's number. Robert's face paled as he listened to the caller. "No way," he muttered, his voice laced with disbelief and fear. Hanging up, He ordered everyone to stay away from the door, offering no explanation as he cautiously approached the window. Peering out, Robert's blood ran cold. There, on their front stoop, crouched a figure, clutching what appeared to be a large, sharp implement. Robert's voice trembled as he shouted through the door, warning the intruder of impending police arrival. As sirens wailed in the distance, the stranger vanished into the stormy night. Later, they learned from their neighbor that he had witnessed a disheveled man pilfering a chopping axe from his shed. Days later, a small article in the local newspaper reported the arrest of a deranged vagrant found wandering the streets of Willow Creek, bringing a chilling conclusion to the Harrison family's brush with terror. In the quiet suburbs of Oakwood, 28-year-old Emma Taylor found herself reliving a childhood nightmare that had haunted her for decades. As she sat in her childhood home, now inherited from her late parents, the memories of that fateful night came flooding back with chilling clarity. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where shadows seemed to linger longer than usual. Emma, then just 8 years old, was sprawled on the living room floor, engrossed in her favorite cartoon. The volume was cranked up, the colorful characters on screen a stark contrast to the encroaching darkness outside. Suddenly, through the animated chatter, Emma heard something that made her blood run cold. Her mother's voice, calling her name from the basement. Confused, she called back, but received no response. Again, the voice drifted up, more insistent this time. Reluctantly, Emma rose and made her way to the basement door. As she descended the creaky wooden stairs, darkness enveloped her. Halfway down, she called out again, her small voice echoing in the void below. Silence was her only answer. A chill ran down Emma's spine as she realized her mother wasn't there. She turned to retreat, but before she could reach the top, her mother's voice called out once more, unmistakably, from the depths of the basement. Emma's heart pounded as she peered into the impenetrable blackness below. Panic seized her, and she bolted up the stairs, tears streaming down her face. She ran through the house, desperately calling for her mother. Sarah Taylor rushed down from the second floor, alarmed by her daughter's distress. Through sobs, Emma recounted the terrifying experience. The voice from the basement that sounded exactly like her mother's. Sarah, attempting to calm her hysterical child, insisted she hadn't called Emma. To prove it, and to ease her daughter's fears, she ventured into the basement herself. But for Emma, the damage was done. She knew what she had heard, and no amount of reassurance could erase the memory of that disembodied voice in the darkness. Now, 2 decades later, as Emma sat in the silent house, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had called to her that night was still there, waiting in the shadows of the basement, ready to call her name once more. In the rolling hills of rural Idaho, where the sky stretches endlessly and the wind whispers secrets through the pines, lies the secluded farm of Harold Thornton. At 72, Harold's life had settled into a comfortable routine with his wife of 15 years, Eleanor, and their loyal Boston Terrier, Whiskey. Every evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Harold would embark on his daily walk with Whiskey. Their usual route took them along a well-worn dirt path that skirted the edge of the dense woods bordering their property. On this particular autumn evening, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. As Harold and Whiskey made their way down the familiar trail, they encountered a stranger, a tall figure shrouded in a large, dark hood. Whiskey's fur bristled as he barked at the passerby, straining against his leash. Harold offered a friendly greeting, but the stranger glided past without acknowledgement, silent as a shadow. As they continued their walk, Whiskey's unease grew. The dog kept glancing back, his barks becoming more insistent. Harold, initially dismissive, felt a creeping sense of dread as he noticed the lengthening shadows. Turning to investigate, his blood ran cold. There, partially hidden behind a gnarled oak, stood the hooded figure, watching them intently. Harold's arthritic joints protested as he quickened his pace, one hand clutching Whiskey's leash, the other buried deep in his coat pocket, fingers wrapped around a canister of pepper spray. The house was in sight now, a beacon of safety in the gathering gloom. Suddenly, the crunch of leaves mere inches behind him shattered the eerie silence. Before Harold could react, a gloved hand clamped over his mouth and nose, cutting off his air. Panic surged through him as he struggled against his assailant's iron grip. Whiskey's frantic barking and snapping seemed distant, muffled by the sound of blood rushing in Harold's ears. With desperation lending him strength, Harold fumbled for the pepper spray. His fingers, stiff with age and fear, finally closed around the canister. In one fluid motion, he raised his arm and unleashed a barrage of stinging spray. The effect was instantaneous. The attacker's grip loosened as he reeled back, howling in pain. Harold didn't hesitate. He sprayed again and again, until the air was thick with the acrid mist. Then, clutching Whiskey close, he stumbled towards home, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. As Harold burst through his front door, slamming it behind him, the full weight of his narrow escape hit him. He was safe, but the memory of those terrifying moments on the darkening trail would haunt him for years to come. A chilling reminder that danger can lurk even in the most familiar of places. In the gritty outskirts of Los Angeles, where the shadows of gang violence loom large, 32-year-old Marcus Reeves found himself revisiting a chilling memory from his youth. The year was 1998, and the streets of Compton were a battleground for rival gangs, most notably the infamous Crips. Marcus and his childhood friend, Tony the Shark Delgado, were inseparable in those days. Their favorite pastime was exploring the neighborhood on their BMX bikes, pushing the boundaries of their urban playground. One sultry summer evening, as the California sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus and Tony found themselves drawn to the infamous ghost house on Elm Street. The dilapidated Victorian mansion had stood abandoned for decades. Its peeling paint and overgrown yard a stark contrast to the well-kept homes surrounding it. As they approached the house, Tony suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing towards a grimy second-floor window. There, barely visible through the tattered lace curtains, was what appeared to be a face, motionless and pale in the fading light. Curiosity overrode caution as the two friends crept closer, their bikes abandoned in the unkempt front yard. The face remained unnaturally still, and as they drew nearer, a horrifying realization dawned on them. It wasn't a face at all, but something far more sinister. Emboldened by their discovery, Marcus and Tony decided to investigate further. They found the back door unlocked, its rusty hinges groaning in protest as they entered the musty interior of the ghost house. The stench hit them immediately. A nauseating mix of decay and something metallic. Guided by the dim light of dusk filtering through dirty windows, they made their way to the front room. There, on the windowsill, sat the object of their curiosity. Marcus reached out, his fingers brushing against what he expected to be cold plastic. Instead, he felt something disturbingly familiar. The texture of human skin, cool and clammy to the touch. He recoiled in horror, the gruesome trophy falling to the floor with a sickening thud. As dark liquid pooled around the severed head, the full horror of their situation crashed over Marcus and Tony. This was no Halloween prank, but a grim calling card left by the Crips, a warning written in blood. Panic set in as a series of ominous creaks echoed from the floor above. Someone, or something, was moving up there, descending towards them. Without a word, Marcus and Tony bolted for the exit, their hearts pounding in unison with their frantic footsteps. Years later, the true story behind the ghost house would come to light. The head belonged to a rival gang member, left as a macabre message in an escalating turf war. But for Marcus, the most chilling thought remained. On that fateful night, how close had he and Tony come to joining the ghost house's grim collection of secrets? In the heart of rural Montana, where the nearest neighbor is a mile away and the night sky stretches endlessly, Sarah Thompson's peaceful evening was about to take a sinister turn. It was a crisp autumn night, the kind where the air carries a hint of winter's approach. Sarah, a 45-year-old widow, had just settled into her favorite armchair with a book, when an unexpected knock echoed through her farmhouse. The sound was jarring in its unexpectedness. Out here, late-night visitors were as rare as rain in the desert. Sarah's instincts, honed by years of solitary living, immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. Cautiously, she approached the door, her hand hovering near the baseball bat she kept for protection. Through the peephole, she saw a man in his 30s, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, an outfit that seemed out of place in these parts. Against her better judgment, Sarah cracked open the door, the security chain still in place. The man, introducing himself as James, launched into a well-rehearsed spiel about a new cleaning product line he was promoting. His smile was too wide, his eyes never quite meeting hers. As James spoke, he produced a Clorox container from his bag, offering it as a free sample. Sarah's unease grew. Something about this situation felt off, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. James gestured towards a minivan parked in the driveway, explaining that he had more products to show. It was then that Sarah's blood ran cold. In the dim light of the vehicle's interior, she could make out the silhouettes of several other men, sitting motionless, watching. In that moment, Sarah knew she was in danger. With a surge of adrenaline, she slammed the door shut, her heart pounding. She could hear James's protests from outside, his friendly demeanor slipping into something more insistent, more threatening. Sarah's hands shook as she fumbled for her cell phone. Unable to find it, she grabbed the kitchen knife, its blade glinting in the low light. She positioned herself around the corner from the door, ready to defend herself if necessary. Through the door, she shouted at James and his unseen companions, her voice stronger than she felt. She warned them that the police were on their way, praying they wouldn't call her bluff. For a moment, silence fell. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps, a car door slamming, and tires screeching on gravel. Sarah waited, knife in hand, for what felt like hours before she dared to look outside. The minivan was gone, leaving only tire tracks in the dirt driveway as evidence of the encounter. Sarah locked and bolted every door and window in the house that night, her sense of security shattered. In the days that followed, Sarah installed a security system and adopted a large guard dog. But even these measures couldn't fully erase the memory of that night when danger came knocking, disguised as a friendly face selling cleaning products. In the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains, where pristine snow-capped peaks pierce the sky and dense forests guard ancient secrets, a chilling tale of survival unfolded. Alex Winters, an adrenaline junkie with a passion for extreme sports, had convinced his longtime friend Marcus to embark on a backcountry skiing adventure. The allure of untouched powder and the thrill of isolation drew them deep into the heart of the mountains, far from the safety of marked trails and patrol routes. After a grueling journey involving a 3-hour drive and treacherous off-roading, Alex's rugged pickup came to a halt at the base of a promising hill. The two friends unloaded their gear, skis, poles, and camping equipment, and began the arduous quarter-mile hike to their chosen campsite. As dusk approached, they set up camp in a small clearing, the looming silhouette of the ski hill, a constant reminder of the adventure that awaited them. With their tent secured and sleeping bags rolled out, Alex and Marcus began their ascent, eager to scout the terrain before nightfall. The exhilaration of carving fresh tracks through untouched snow was intoxicating. But as they pushed further into the backcountry, the friends became separated. Alex, assuming they'd reconnect at the bottom, continued his descent. It was then that fate took a sinister turn. At the base of the hill, Alex encountered another skier, a man whose friendly demeanor was hidden behind a ski mask and goggles. The stranger spoke of looking for a campsite for himself and his wife, asking Alex for directions. Despite his exhaustion, Alex agreed to guide the man back to his own camp, attempting to radio Marcus as they walked. As they neared the campsite, a growing sense of unease crept over Alex. The stranger's equipment looked eerily familiar, too familiar. With a jolt of horror, Alex realized he recognized Marcus's distinctive skis and backpack. In a heart-stopping moment, the stranger's demeanor shifted from friendly to menacing. Alex dove for the tent, desperately searching for his flare gun as the attacker grabbed his leg. A searing pain shot through Alex's calf as a knife plunged deep into his flesh. With adrenaline surging, Alex managed to retrieve the flare gun, forcing the assailant to back away. But the victory was short-lived. As Alex called for emergency rescue, the attacker melted into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Hours crawled by as Alex fought against pain and the encroaching cold. The whir of helicopter blades finally broke the eerie silence, guided to the location by Alex's last remaining flare. In a cruel twist of fate, the rescue team also located Marcus, unconscious and wounded, on the very hill where their adventure began. Both friends survived their ordeal, but the scars, both physical and psychological, would serve as a permanent reminder of the day when their winter wonderland transformed into a landscape of terror. In the quaint college town of Millbrook, where historic buildings stood shoulder to shoulder with modern student housing, an unsuspecting hero emerged on a fateful night. Ethan, a diligent law student, found himself burning the midnight oil on the front porch of his apartment complex. The clock had just struck 2:30 a.m., and the streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional echo of distant laughter from the nearby bar district. As Ethan lounged on the porch steps, his textbook sprawled before him, the sound of unsteady footsteps caught his attention. His neighbor, Olivia, a woman he knew only by sight, was making her way home from a night out. Her slightly wobbling gait betrayed the influence of a few too many drinks. No sooner had Olivia's door clicked shut than a shadow materialized from the darkness. A man, previously unseen, rapped his knuckles against her door. Ethan's senses, honed by years of studying criminal behavior, immediately went on high alert. The stranger's voice, unnaturally cheerful for the late hour, drifted across the courtyard as he introduced himself to Olivia. The incongruity of the situation sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Who makes social calls at this ungodly hour? For over 10 excruciating minutes, Ethan watched the bizarre interaction unfold. The man's body language screamed predator, his hand reaching out to stroke Olivia's hair, his body inching ever closer to the threshold of her apartment. Olivia's discomfort was palpable, even from a distance. Determined to make his presence known, Ethan deliberately rustled his textbook pages, the sound cutting through the night air like a warning shot. The effect was immediate. The stranger, startled by the realization they weren't alone, melted back into the shadows as swiftly as he had appeared. In the days that followed, as Ethan and Olivia recounted their experience to the police and sat with a sketch artist, the true horror of what they had witnessed began to unfold. The man's face, rendered in stark black and white, triggered a flood of similar reports. The stranger was no ordinary creep, but a serial predator who had been terrorizing the college town for months. His modus operandi was chilling, following intoxicated women home from bars, posing as a helpful cab driver offering a safe ride. Olivia's proximity to the bar district had inadvertently foiled his usual approach, forcing him to improvise. In doing so, he had exposed himself to Ethan's watchful eye. As the case unfolded in the media, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of how close they had come to tragedy. The night served as a stark reminder that sometimes, the most mundane of choices, like choosing to study on a porch, can have profound consequences. In the quiet suburbs of Knoxville, a sinister secret lurked behind the doors of 42 Maple Street. This is the story of Jack Thompson, a 35-year-old software engineer, whose innocent quest for a ping-pong table led him into the depths of human depravity. It was a crisp autumn evening when Jack pulled up to the residence of Victor Blackwood, responding to a Craigslist ad. The house, a nondescript two-story colonial, gave no hint of the horrors it concealed. As Jack approached the front door, he was greeted by Victor, a man whose gravelly voice seemed to scrape against the air itself. Without ceremony, Victor led Jack to the basement, where the promised ping-pong table stood. "Wait here," Victor rasped, ascending the stairs in search of paddles. Minutes stretched into an eternity, as Jack, left alone, began to explore his surroundings. The basement walls were adorned with framed photographs, all featuring Victor in solitary poses. The absence of family or friends in these images struck Jack as oddly unsettling. Curiosity led Jack to a back room, where a partially open drawer caught his eye. What he discovered inside would haunt him for years to come. Polaroid photographs, yellowed with age, depicted unspeakable acts. Beside them, a row of folders labeled A to Z hinted at a horrifying catalogue of victims. Panic rising in his throat, Jack reached for his phone, only to find no signal in the subterranean room. His heart pounding, he bolted for the stairs, only to find the door locked. Victor's voice, muffled through the wood, spoke of a misplaced key. But Jack, driven by instinct and fear, searched desperately for another way out. In a moment of clarity, he grabbed a screwdriver from Victor's workbench and managed to manipulate the lock. Freedom came in a rush of adrenaline as Jack fled the house, not daring to look back. His next stop was the police station, where his evidence set in motion an investigation that would shock the community. Days later, the truth emerged. Victor Blackwood was not just a solitary man with a ping-pong table to sell, but a key player in a dark web of exploitation and abuse. The folders, each representing a letter of the alphabet, contained evidence of countless lives destroyed. As for Victor's intentions with Jack that night, they remain a chilling mystery. But one thing is certain, a simple Craigslist transaction had unveiled a monster hiding in plain sight, reminding us all that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk behind the most ordinary facades. In the quiet suburbs of Alexander City, where perfectly manicured lawns hide secrets behind drawn curtains, 28-year-old Olivia Reed found herself reliving a chilling memory from her past. A decade had passed since that fateful night when she took on what seemed like a routine babysitting job, but the events of that evening would haunt her dreams for years to come. The Hartley residence stood at the end of Maple Street, a Victorian-style home with gabled windows and a wraparound porch. As Olivia approached the front door that rainy afternoon, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley greeted her with forced smiles, their eyes darting nervously as they introduced their son, Ethan. "He's different," Mrs. Hartley had whispered, her voice barely audible over the patter of rain on the windows. "You might hear him talking to his friend, Lilith. Don't worry about it." As the Hartley's car disappeared down the driveway, Olivia settled into the living room, the TV's flickering light casting long shadows across the antique furniture. Ethan sat on the floor, surrounded by a sea of toys, his small voice rising and falling in animated conversation with thin air. The first incident occurred as Olivia was flipping through channels. A vintage music box on the far side of the room suddenly sprang to life, its tinkling melody filling the room with an eerie resonance. Ethan's eyes lit up. "Lilith loves that song," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. As night fell, the house seemed to come alive with unexplained noises, creaking floorboards, whispers in empty rooms, the sound of small footsteps when Ethan was clearly in view. Olivia's unease grew with each passing hour. The breaking point came when Olivia excused herself to use the bathroom. As she washed her hands, a soft knock echoed from the door. "Ethan," she called out, her voice trembling. But when she opened the door, the hallway was empty. Suddenly, the door at the end of the hall, the master bedroom she'd been explicitly told not to enter, began to open slowly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Panic rising in her throat, Olivia rushed to investigate, only to find Ethan sitting on his parents' bed, his eyes fixed on a point just over her shoulder. "Who opened the door, Ethan?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lilith did," Ethan replied, his face breaking into a wide grin. "She likes you." Olivia spent the remainder of the evening in the living room. Ethan clutched tightly to her side, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. When the Hartleys finally returned, Olivia managed a weak smile, keeping the night's events to herself. Days later, when Mrs. Hartley called to book her again, Olivia's phone rang unanswered. Some doors, once opened, are best left closed, and some friends, like Ethan's Lilith, are best left uninvited.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.